I start. So I can start. Until the 21st century, sociality was discussed only in the dimension of interhuman relations. But the crisis of Anthropocene forces to reflect how humanity, sociality, and self-awareness constitute in the relation to nature and animals. Jacques Derrida and critics of anthropocentrism exposed convincingly how the constitution of human depends on violence against non-human animals. It is very bright topics, and I will reflect only on few moments. And in my presentation, I will reflect on some issues and present two contemporary positions that offers phenomenological tools to think the ground of human-animal communality and difference relations in the broad field of critique of anthropocentrism. For these both positions, Husserl's phenomenology is the starting point, but I will not present broadly these positions' insights into animal life due to space limit. My point is not to present a rich phenomenological tradition on question animal, but to answer the question, what can phenomenology offer for the debates on the critique of anthropocentrism? So let's start from the question about anthropocentrism, critique of anthropocentrism. What are motives of the criticism of anthropocentrism? A common thread can be traced in phenomenology, posthumanism, biophilosophy, and so on. Animal ethics, it is violence against animals. In the debates on the anthropocentrism, the issues of power and ideology dominate. For example, Matthew Calarco states, you can see the quote, yes or not? Okay, I will suggest that the genuine critical target of progressive thought and politics today should be anthropocentrism as such. For it, always one version or another of the human that falsely occupies the space of universal and that functions to exclude what considered non-human from ethical and political consideration. So anthropocentrism is understood as an attitude which puts the human at the center, making the central concern and problem. Whereas anthropological difference is something that separates the humans from other living beings, displaces animals beyond ethics and politics, and establishes hierarchical relations. It should be noted that in the criticism of speciesism and anthropocentrism, anthropocentrism itself is considered as an ideology which understood in terms of power, control, and exploitation. As Calarco notes, the second quote, anthropocentrism, as I define the term, refers to a set of relations and systems of powers that are in the service of those who are considered by a dominant culture to be fully and properly human. Therefore, the end of quote. Therefore, the human creates the idea of oneself as an exceptional being, presenting it as an order of reality, and thus lays the foundations for the exploitation of other living beings. Since anthropocentrism is considered in terms of power and domination in the above-mentioned discussion, not only human actions, but also attitudes, thinking, ever the perception of the human self also have an aspect of violence. Thinkers such as Jacques Derrida and Giorgio Agamben have it revealed quite clearly, but I have no space here to present both position of both. I can only to refer that Derrida equates anthropocentrism with logocentrism, which means that violence is not only actions with violence, but also an interpretation in itself. What can phenomenology bring to this context? Um, in this context, as phenomenology reflects the conditions of a possibility of experience, it can help understand the extent to which a non-anthropocentric view to animal and ourselves is possible. It could be argued from the phenomenological perspective that anthropocentrism as an ideology of human exceptionalism should be distinguished from human anthropocentricity, which is an inevitable condition of experience and is rooted in centrality of ego. Human anthropocentricity could be considered as an strata of experience, a peculiar center on which we experience any living being only as given to the human. Only under certain cultural conditions can anthropocentricity turn into anthropocentrism. Phenomenology could clarify to what extent non-anthropocentric point of view is possible and how naive is the view that it is possible to completely suspend or overcome anthropocentricity. So let's start, and I will present both positions, which I think is very important in this discussion. First, it would be a position for Javier San Martin and Matteo Luis Penaranda, and second will be position from Nathalie Deprat. So let's go to the first position. In 2001, Javier San Martin and Maria Luz Pintos Penaranda published the article Animal Life and Phenomenology. We return to the transcendental ego structures thematized by Husserl in the second volume of Ideas, and propose that the concept of transcendental subjectivity must be extended to non-human animals. We also want to formulate guidelines for new ontology of non-human animals. However, it should be noted that unlike Husserl, the ideas are not driven by epistemological issues, but by an ethical motive. They begin their text with naming the human malpractices when treating animals. So you can see this a quote with pictures of these practices. They say non-human animals are excluded from their natural environment. Their habitat conditions are degraded to that survival is impossible. Their movements are restricted. They are bred in overcrowded and stressful conditions for commercial progress. So you can see this quote. I will not end, and I will go further. So it is rather easy to identify both past and present malpractices of handling animals here. But why such practices are selected from the diversity of a human-animal relationship? What is here is the question, what is presupposition lead to this approach of San Martin and Pintos? I think phenomenology has been struggling with concept of animals since the early 20th century. It may seem that rather strange that at the beginning of the 21st century, such attempt is being made anew when it was really done in the first half of 20th century by Jakob Uexküll, Husserl, Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, and others. However, the stronger ethical motivation makes it possible to enunciate those moments of transcendental issues that seems to be forgotten today or self-evident to such extent that no one wants to return to them. If animals are only mechanisms, their experience and emotions can be ignored. They can be bred, contained, transported as raw materials and objects. The first thing San Martin and Pintos want to prove is that animals are not automatons and are just as alive as any sentient being. They do this by looking back to Husserl. San Martin and Pintos rely on Husserl's second value of ideas by considering the ego structure as characteristic of both human and animals. Ego is a pole of intentionality and the center activity and perception. Hence, it is common to all beings with mental life. This step by San Martin and Pintos itself might seem unexpected, as in the phenomenological tradition, the transcendental ego is understood as a human ego. Perhaps this is the case because of Husserl's reflections, where the transcendental ego is a structure that is given together with reflection. Husserl distinguishes the core common to animal, the pure ego, which Husserl defines as the subject of acts and states. It is given as that which in perception is directed to perceived, in knowing to the known, and fantasizing to fantasize, and so on. But Husserl notes that, beginning of quote, the essence of the pure ego thereby includes the possibility of an originary self-grasp, a self-perception, the end of quote. Although Husserl didn't deny the possibility of the animal's self-perception, the pure ego in his phenomenology is considered only as a given for the human. Hence, from this is understandable why Husserl did not delve deeper into transcendental structures of animals' experience, and his claim that the pure ego is given to all animated beings was of little significance to his own phenomenology. San Martin and Pintos re-evaluate these moments in Husserl's phenomenology and form new guidelines for the animal question in phenomenology. They put the issue of reflection aside and examine the commonality of human and animal ego. The authors choose the centrality of the ego and the constitution of sense as their cornerstones. By asking how animals are given to us, San Martin and Pintos claim that non-human life is given in exactly the same way as human life, with the same characteristic of centrality and epistemic intimacy that defines subjectivity. They base such statement on the analogous way of the other's givenness to oneself formulated in through theory of intersubjectivity. We can recognize the pure ego of animals as by analogy we are given to understand that they are also the center of their own activity, perception, knowledge, and action accordingly. This is undeniable. Furthermore, constitution is recognized in animals. According to San Martin and Pintos, if they have a mental life, that mental life must have a transcendental sense. That means it must be constituted. So if animals have perception, then for them and their objects are constituted in one form or another. In formulating guidelines for the phenomenological access to animal life, San Martin and Pintos list 11 points that are common to all human and non-human animal subjects. They claim, second quote, they claim that maybe you see this only. Wait a minute. Maybe that is better. So it's better. Okay. We claim every animal subject, human and non-human, is a corporeal life. Everyone has living body which is different from the dead one, can feel, experience, and act corporeal. They control their body as, in their own. Animals have their corporeality and are the center of their own activity. Every animal is subject is the 0 point of his world. Animals act in relation to the environment, surrounding objects, and other living beings. The time experience of all animals, both human and non-human, is integral. All animals experience their body directly. Their bodies are given to them in their original presence. Each subject has its own perspective, both of its own place and the peculiar ways which objects are given. Each subject experiences the common world and it has its own social horizon of species. They empathize, understand, and get in touch with each other. The authors emphasize that language should be understood here on the basis of corporeal activity and that we should not forget that the human has inherited some communicative forms from his ancestors. Every animal subject is an animate organism. It can express oneself, communicate with other animals, give an understanding of oneself through expression and understanding other subject to some extent. Each subject can understand alien species to a certain degree. And last, the first contact with each subject with the other is affective and emotional. Here they acknowledge, the authors acknowledge that one can speak only of the emotions of those animals that one can recognize. However, San Martin and Pinto stress that we can recognize the positive or negative response from animals in any case, what is good or harmful to them. Through this, we are able to see whether animals experience positive or negative states and emotions. It can be seen these guidelines are based on the pure ego structure. San Martin and Pintos consider that such a revision of transcendental subjectivity is significant in that our being intertwined with other animals at the transcendental level also binds us ethically. We cannot disagree with such an ethical connection, but we must acknowledge that San Martin and Pintos have done important work in revisiting transcendental subjectivity, and yet their guidelines should be not adopted too enthusiastically, I think. One may ask, what are the limits of erasing the anthropological difference? The emotions of many mammals or birds are recognizable, and the question of their suffering binds us ethically. But what about other animals that also can be recognized as being at the center of their own activities, perceptions, and so on? What about the reptiles, fishes, insects, worms, jellyfish? When I kill the mosquito that bites me, I think I have no ethical relation with it, despite being able to recognize the ego as the pole of intentionality in the mosquito's activity. There seems to be a few more issues that needed to be addressed. First, the question on the scope concerning the conceptualization of animals' needs. San Martin and Pintos emphatically state that all animals, both human and non-human, are transcendental subjectivities. What is meant by all animals here? You may agree that the minimal structure of the ego is common to many animals, but the enthusiastic association of transcendentality with ethics shows that phenomenology tends to think only on those animals whose emotions and suffering are easily recognizable. Generalizing statements about all animals should be made with great care. Second, it must be acknowledged that attempts to say anything about all animals keep a danger to humanize animals. When we are freed from the violence of mechanization, another violence of humanization begins. Thirdly, we should not only limit the scope of animals with which we have an ethical relationship, but also extend the variety of relation and interaction with them. I think it is necessary to address the issue of communality at the transcendental level by not only focusing on erasing the anthropological difference in certain layers of experience, but returning to the anthropological difference and ask how much our anthropocentricity determines our relations with animals. So I think some problems solve second position, Nathalie Deprat position. She thinks human-animal relation in not only on transcendental, not only in problematic of pure ego, but in the problematic of normality and anomaly. So let's go further to Nathalie Deprat and Phenomenological subjects and structure of empathy. She presents this in her article, The Husserlian Theory of Intersubjectivity. At the heart of the second position is not so much the question of commonality, but the difference and the issue of accessibility of liminal subjects. This position is significant if we want to understand the conditions and limits of access to animal experiences, to understand the extent to which non-anthropocentric point of view is possible. In developing Husserl's theory of intersubjectivity as alterology, Nathalie Deprat offers the structure of empathy. She borrows Husserl's notion that I, as the transcendental ego, is the norm and the liminal subjects are anomalous to it. Here, she also emphasizes the ethical motive. She argues that anomaly is a pure descriptive term, and the difference between normality and anomaly should in no way be understood as the hierarchy of values. On the contrary, the beginning of quote, not being deficient subjects who would be missing something, infants, animals, the insane, and aliens are generative subjects, enabling and compelling us to learn and to become familiar with unknown dimensions of ourselves and with new horizons of our world. They enrich ourselves and enlarge our world. As generative subjects, they generate new views in us. As liminal subjects, as I call them after Husserl limes subjecte, they pave the way for an unlimiting of my own egoic subjectivity. End of quote. Therefore, the understanding and self-perception of ours is formed not only by turning to oneself through the means of reflection, but also through encounters with alien others who call to recognize something similar in oneself or acknowledge an unsurpassable limit. Deprat offers an outline for the structure of empathy that consists of 4 stages, the 4 steps of empathy. These stages are not in chronological order of experience, but they are the layers of the same process. So empathy consists of, as lists Nathalie Deprat, first, a passive association of my lived body with your lived body. Second, an imaginative self-transposal in your psychic states. Third, an interpretative understanding of yourself as being as alien to me. And last, an ethical responsibility toward yourself as a person, enjoying and suffering. So what does it mean? How Deprat interpret this structure? Using Husserl's concept of Paarung, Deprat argues that empathy takes place in a much more passive and primitive layer than in the reflecting understanding of the other. The first stage of pairing is coupling. As explained Deprat, you can see site. Coupling is an associative process through which my lived body and your lived body experience a similar functioning of our tactile, auditory, visual, proprioceptive body style, of our embodied behavior in the world, and of our affective and active kinesthetic habits and acts. Coupling is a holistic experience of lived body resemblance. It is important to remind that for Husserl, the appearance is not the identification of the other, but the pairing association. The other appears not as an object to be presented and identified, but as the other self whose appearance immediately points to the self and perception, which is given to one only on representational ground. Coupling analogization means that the other appears and constitutes as the other. Husserl placed more emphasis on the aspect of pure ego formation, whereas Debra, likely influenced by Merleau-Ponty, expand the understanding of coupling. Hence, the first stage and part already includes what Husserl called empathy, Einfühlung. The second stage is imaginative self-transposal that deals with the cooperative encounter of our embodied psychic states. Debra refers to Husserl, who interprets the other's understanding on the basis of grounding oneself in the place of the other or exchanging places. I can see from the place of the other as if I were standing over there where the other's body is. It is the site of Husserl. Although Husserl generally uses the term Einfühlung for this purpose, Debra chooses less commonly used term sich hineinfantasieren. This step is significant in understanding the experiences of liminal subjects, but can be rather confusing when it comes to normal experiences. And so Debra describes the third and fourth stages briefly. You can see understanding and communication and ethical responsibility can be summarized as follows. The third step of empathy involves expression, verbal or not, and interpretation. It is a cognitive step. The fourth step deals with ethics, affection, and considering the other as having emotions, suffering, and joy. Debra only offers an outline which has to be further developed by oneself. She doesn't say much about the interactions with animal, but gives an important indications. What is important, Debra says also that with non-reflective consciousness, children and animal, we are connected with intersubjectivity as interaffection. Now I want to go to elaboration further. This structure of empathy. I see that I have no time to, but I have a text more. The nature of the first stage of commonality is not perception of the same thing with animals, of these liminal subjects, but the interaction and influence of each other. The interaction should be considered not as a mechanical action, but a certain way of understanding. For example, when playing with my dog, I understand him not by thinking about his psychic states, but by working together, knowing from experience how to understand his gaze and gestures. It is only through interaction and action that humans are introduced to understand animals. The nature of such knowledge could be interpreted in the light of Merleau-Ponty's concept of corporeality, which might seem as the third stage of passive association. Phenomenologically, animals are accessible to us through the closeness or distance to the structure of our own corporeality. From the point of view of normality and anomaly, a more definite structure of bodily experience needs to be captured, as it makes it easier for us to understand similarly moving and functioning beings. It is not hard to understand how a dog with better smell finds a ball lost in the grass, but it's hard to understand how a jellyfish orients itself in the ocean or migratory birds do not lose their course. Following Merleau-Ponty, it is important to know that closeness or distance is not determined by having one sense or another, but by bodily movement as a project of action. As Merleau-Ponty observes, it is never our objective body that we move, but our phenomenal body. Phenomenal body is not bones, muscles, and nerves, but potentialities already mobilized by perception, which are concentrated in the action that links the subject through intentional threads with objects. We have a similar type of experience, the power to orient and act in the neosphere, and these powers are not understood according to the bodily organs, but through the intentional threads between the subject action and the surrounding objects. Yet it must be emphasized that animals close to us in their corporeality are accessible only in terms of the contact of this passive association and not in terms of thinking. We understand them perfectly through this layer of experience until we once start to ask what is in their minds. In the stage of passive association, understanding each other is the interaction itself. It is the knowledge of action, of knowledge through action. When I play with cat, I don't have to ask how it feels when it starts catching a rope stretch on the ground. All of this is understood not by thinking about the dog's or cat's psychic states, but by acting together and influencing, interaffecting each other. Everything seems easily until the obviousness of perception is confirmed by interaction. But that is only one layer of experience. The second stage, imaginative self-transposal into the other's psychic states, is probably the most problematic layer of our experience. On the one hand, it is necessary to some extent. Realizing that the other has its own center on a very abstract level, I have to stand in its place, or at least understand how it perceives. On the other hand, the other is perceived in an analogous way according to one's own personal experience, the horizon of cultural environment. So there is a possibility to impose my projections to someone else, to project our own perceptual structures and components into the other center of perception. This step is the source of misunderstanding. For example, I have here some examples. Do you see these slides? Yes, what does it mean? These fishes are in the spawning time, and when people see these fishes, they mostly say how beautiful that these fishes kiss each other in this spawning process, but really there is no kisses because these fishes fights and it's a little bit enigmatic why in the period of spawning this fight is needed. And you can see here also some fishes which are named kissing gurame. So these fishes also not kisses, but it's a simple fight between two males. Here we can see many cases where we can where we simply project our experiences to animals. You can see. I will show some photos. For example, what you see in these pictures. You see happy animals. They smile. They seem very, very happy. Yes, but it's really their experiences. The second one, you can see such animals. They feel fear or looks very clever, there is also a question what they experience such site. And another one, you can see something like religious experience and this altar and so on. Maybe they are praying but what experience
Mintautas, sorry. Mm-hmm. So if you would like to have a discussion, you should go to the end of your talk.
Okay. And the last one, only a few minutes. And last one, you also can see some emotions of animals. They seems quite human, and maybe you understand your own emotions, what you will do in such places. So I think that this is the second stage. Analogization is from one side is necessary, but from the second, But on the other hand, it is source of our it is when we make simply projections to animals' minds. So I will think that the first stage, I don't think that I have no time to explain about this cognitive step. I can only to refer to some biologist. For example, it was Victoria Breitweiter, who she wrote a book, Do Fish Feel Pain? I have no time to tell something about this experiment, but I think that in this structure of empathy, here we should have we should have some knowledge which is not through intersubjectivity as intercorporeality, but through some biological experiments which are made, and this is, as Breitweiter said, this quite speculative knowledge. I have no place, yes, to start. So I only can notice that projections to animal minds are provided not only our analogization, but also science project to animal minds with their mental map, scientific models, structures, and so on. And the fourth stage about ethical responsibility for other suffering or the happy one, I think it is greatly significant to the structure of empathy, but unfortunately often overlooked. Undoubtedly, the motive of ethical responsibility led Breitweiter to answer the question of whether fish can suffer in a particular experiences that takes places in an encounter with the other appears as the other who addresses me and I respond. The relationship begins if I respond to the other. I allow myself to be affected, to be a part of interaction. It should be noted that the ethical response lies within this four-stage structure of empathy. This means that on the one hand, it is an appeal of the other and my response that awakens a passive association and interaction. The other's appeal motivates me to understand. On the other hand, the ethical response is stronger in relation to those liminal subjects whose experience can be more easily recognized. The ethical response is not abstract. We can overlook that not all animals spark compassion. For example, suffering dog will almost always cause compassion, but jellyfish thrown ashore, which might already be dead, not so much. Their helpless lying on the shore doesn't manifest themselves in the same way as the suffering dog. That is not to say we cannot be sensitive or responsive to jellyfish, but corporeal expression is not as comprehensible as the suffering dog eyes when you come to help it. An ethical response calls for interaction and relationship with the other. Therefore, an ethical response to the other is a condition of passive association and awakening of attentiveness to the other. And I go to conclusion. Here's written.
Mintautas, sorry. It remains just about 5 minutes for discussion. It's up to you now to decide if to stop here or just to come to the end and then without discussion. It's up to you.
Mm-hmm. I think that I should read very simply this conclusion. Every animal subject, human and non-human, this is a problem. Phenomenology opens up a plane of commonality on a much deeper than biological and psychological level. In terms of intentionality, constitutionality, effectiveness, and emotions, humans and animals have common structures. This allows us to recognize and know animal emotions as well as respond to our treatment of them. It is necessary to reflect that the perceiving human is an anthropocentric being whose anthropocentricity can easily be transformed into anthropocentrism as an ideology of human exceptionalism. In terms of accessibility of liminal subject, it must be acknowledged that the human is undeniably at the center. The structures of thinking, language, and so on are self-given to the human, whereas animal experience is only partially accessible. Fully non-anthropocentric point of view is not possible. The most we can achieve is a self-reflective and self-limiting attitude which stops oneself on the right moment. If we act carefully and responsibly towards animals, they expand our own subjectivity, opening up new perspective to recognize animals and our own lives in terms of diversity of life forms. If we allow animals to become those others who can decentralize us and opens up new perspective, and our identity is also formed as an environment of new coexistence, not only in the interhuman relation. So I can stop share, and I understand that we have no time for discussion. So thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much for your very stimulating talk. But we have just a couple of minutes for very short questions, if any. Please, Uldis.
Hi, thank you, Mintautas, for the very stimulating presentation. So I have two questions, but I will pose one question as we are practically out of time. So am I understanding it correctly that so what phenomenological approach provides us is with this idea that ethical treatment of animals is linked to our possibility to be open to other kinds of experiences, and so we should be ethical. So the argument is we should be ethical because it helps us sort of surpass, at least partially, our sort of limited subjectivity, and so that's why we should treat animals ethically. Am I correct in understanding it?
Very short answers, please.
Yes, you have correctly understand. I think that was this is only two sentences. I think there is a big problem is when we talk about all animals. Can we empathize all animals? Can we equally treat all animals? I think we should reflect our centricity, our possibilities to experience, our possibilities to empathize, our possibilities to compassion. So I think that is the field of phenomenological work.